Welcome to another episode of the Being and Doing podcast, where I try to create space dedicated to unique minds that are all around us and hopefully brings a series of stories that will hopefully challenge, inspire, and stimulate your being. And today I'm joined by Frank Norman. And I think it's an interesting topic we are going to bring here. And we are going to talk about librarians in this day and age and the keepers of knowledge. And what is it that modern day librarians are facing as a challenge while trying to collect and gather knowledge? So welcome, Frank.
Okay.
So I'm curious just to hear something about you. So who you are, and also knowing that you're recently going to retire, what has been your life mission?
My life mission, I guess, just to survive. But yeah, so I'm Frank Norman. I'm currently head of library services at the Francis Crick Institute. I've been working in libraries in the biomedical area for I think about 40 years now. I'm also a gay man, coming out relatively late in life, so that had its own challenges, and we'll talk a bit about that. In other parts of life, I enjoy running. I'm very slow now with my knees, but I also sing in choirs. I have done that for a very long time, and I've had a lot of amazing experiences singing in all kinds of different venues and all kinds of different music. From the proms to Glastonbury, I think the two extreme ends.
That is incredible. I'm now even more curious, and I'm thinking this conversation is not going to be only about being a librarian. So that's beautiful. So maybe let's talk about what does it entail to be a librarian in biomedical sciences?
What does it entail? Well, I was just say something broadly about libraries. A librarian, we work in various different sectors. So typically we think of three areas of libraries. There's public libraries, which have a more of a social element to them, and they're very wide ranging. There are academic libraries serving students and researchers in universities, educational establishments. And then there are workplace libraries serving people working in a particular organization. And the Crick, as a research institute, we're not quite academic, and we're more workplace, but we've got some aspects of academic libraries. So a research institute libraries, a librarian is something a little bit in between various sorts. But the key thing is, as a librarian of research institute, I know who my audience is. It's a well-defined audience, and so I can get to know what they need very well. So these different sorts of librarians have different approaches and goals, but we share some things. So I think number one, maybe the thing you first think of, is organizing and categorizing information resources. So all libraries will do something of that. And we also need to understand the whole system by which information and knowledge is produced and published. So we work a lot with publishers. And assessing information resources to some extent, because we have information resources typically cost money or resource, and we have to decide where to spend that. So we have to make choices between different resources. So we have to assess or ask our users to help us assess things. So that was number one. Number two is understanding users' needs and satisfying those needs. And I think that word satisfying, we get often a lot of the satisfaction of the job is it comes through the satisfaction of users' requests, helping them to get what they need to know. And thirdly, searching for information. Used to be through looking through printed indexes. Now more and more it involves IT. Well, almost always it involves IT. So searching, and somebody described a librarian as I've forgotten the phrase now, but it had something about the terrier. An information being an information terrier, we don't rest until we've found the answer, which can be a problem because sometimes there isn't an answer and you have to give up. But we typically want to keep going until we've found at least an answer. So those are the three things that I think all libraries will share to some degree, and more all library work involves tech skills. And coming to the end of my career, I can see there's big gaps in my tech skills. So I can see that having somebody come in to replace me, they will have a whole lot more, a much higher level of skill than I have in those areas.
And so what do you think was the creative part of your job? Because there are so many aspects of what you're doing, and where do you feel was your creative expression within what you were doing?
Well, there's always material to be written, so writing reports from various things, business proposals, or writing information about some of the new products services that we offer to market them to people. So that's more creative. And I think curating. So, for instance, we have a historical book collection, and we put on little exhibitions of small selections of books. So that aspect always feels creative to me, that you select a few items from the collection which you think make a coherent whole and are interesting to users, and we'll do some curation, describe each object, each book or item. So that sort of curatorial aspect is very creative and rewarding.
Yeah, I must say it's one of my favorite parts. I always like to take the small booklets and almost as a kind of a refresher of things that I would like to, or topics I might have not thought about, but have been written about. So thank you for doing that, I have to say. And I'm sorry.
I always enjoy when we can make connection. I think the thing that in my head that made me a librarian is something about matching up patterns and making connections. So I always enjoy being able to make connections, perhaps between unexpected things or things which are less well known, and highlighting the connections of this obscure item with something more well known.
I mean, now that you're describing it, actually, librarian sounds very much like a scientist.
Perhaps. Well, I think on the pattern matching, seeing patterns between phenomena, I guess, is similar.
Yeah, and you just now briefly touched about what brought you into this work, but what was actually initially that brought you into being a librarian? What was the appeal? Was it books? Was it the organizational part, or a bit of both?
Well, I'm one of the rare people that found the careers advisor at my school was useful.
Okay.
I know they come in for a lot of slack, but at school, you're pressured into saying, what are you going to do with your life? What's your career? So I had no idea whatsoever. The careers advisor they get you to do an aptitude test, and somehow in that, categorizing and organizing, classifying I seemed to come out stronger in that area. I'd never thought about working in libraries or information science, but they suggested that, and I thought, yeah, sounds all right. So problem solved. I don't have to worry what's my career going to be. That's what I'm going to do. So I'd made that decision. I worked in a public library headquarters for a year after school before going to university, and then I did a chemistry degree, and after that went on to do a 1-year postgraduate diploma in librarianship. So I was all set, with my science background and my library qualification and a little bit of experience. And I then worked in a pharmaceutical company in library for 6 years. That was quite a long time for a first job, but it was a very good grounding in all kinds of areas. With a little bit of library automation. So that was just, the library automation was kind of really starting to get going. So I had a little exposure to IT then. Um, I'll continue with my pre-prepared stuff. So then I thought I have to get out of this, or I'll be here the rest of my life. I need to switch jobs, and I got a post in a hospital library, running a hospital library in Saudi Arabia, which was in some ways much more like a regular library, but in other ways obviously in a very different environment. But that gave me a lot more exposure to PCs. IBM PCs in the 80s were all the rage. So I had a lot more work with PCs, and did a lot more online searching. So my tech skills there increased considerably. After 3 years, I'd had enough of that, and came back to the UK and got a job as a deputy librarian at NIMR Mill Hill. So that was a research institute in North London. So that was, and I was deputy librarian for 10 years up to 1999. And that was a wonderful time to be there, because I was in a leading biological institute, and with lots of brilliant people doing lots and lots of molecular biology. So they really were interested in all of the gene sequence information, and this, with the Human Genome Project and all of the sequencing work going on, this was also at the time that the internet started coming to the fore in the early 90s. So I delved into exploring information on the internet and helping people to find biological information through that route. So I did a lot of evangelizing about the internet, and getting into web and setting up websites, and set up a project to help people find information as well. 10 years later, my boss retired, and I moved up to become head of the library. So that was 1999 to 2015. So dealing with e-journals, all of our print journals migrated into electronic versions, and we slowly moved into subscribing to all of those. I also did a lot of work with the NIMR website, managing that, and kind of started branching out. So the annual report of the Institute came my way to organize that. Mill Hill Essays, an annual booklet of essays about science for the general public. So moving away from just librarianship to more writing and editing and writing research news items. Also, I gained responsibility for the NIMR archives, historical archives, and historical collections. So, having been the vanguard of the internet, electronic information, I was also now having to learn about the past and old printed materials.
So while you're talking about this, I just feel like a lot of richness within one life. On one hand, you have a lot of rich cultural experience, being exposed to different working cultures, and then also cultures as in you worked in Saudi Arabia. But then also what is impressive for me is that your life has been a series of very fast, very intense changes. And I'm curious, what helped you to kind of keep the curiosity and not be afraid of changing yourself?
Yeah, it's curious hearing someone else describe your life in a way you hadn't thought about. I've never really planned anything. I've moved along, seen an opportunity, sometimes been successful in getting them, sometimes not. But where I've been able to take advantage of that opportunity, I've moved into that and then explored. So it hasn't felt. I'm not a big risk taker, so I've always sort of make sure that I can see the next handhold before I move the next position. So I don't take great leaps of faith. So I guess I move very steadily, rather than moving into areas of great uncertainty. I see what's there, and I also learning from others, seeing that someone else has done this in a slightly different environment. I can adapt that and do that in this environment. So I think just plodding on, but being open to new experiences or new opportunities.
And I'm now wondering, what would have been some challenges that you have experienced in this path, and what do you think is a challenge of working in academic librarianship?
I think one of the challenges is a couple of things. One is that librarians, we don't have a very high status often, so we're in a university. Perhaps it's a bit different. They're running much bigger organizations, but libraries tend to be not always the priority strategically for an organization. When I look around colleagues in other organizations, quite a few of them have been made redundant. They've closed down the library, or they've reduced it to a much smaller unit. So I think status is a continual problem for librarians. We can see that what we do is important, but it's often hard to see how it adds to the bottom line. I think in a research environment it's perhaps clearer, but another challenge is the move from print to digital, mm-hmm. and from digital to online. There is a thought amongst some that everything's just out there on the internet, and that if you Google, you'll find everything you need. You'll certainly find a lot, but you won't find everything. And particularly there's a lot of material which hasn't been digitized, historical material. So there's sort of a sense that if it's not online, it doesn't exist. So anything before 1990 may not exist, although some older material is digitized. So that sort of sense that what we do is no longer required, or that we've been superseded. And of course, comparing with the start of my career, the work that I did then, much of that just doesn't get done now. So much of what I was doing earlier, or even 20 years ago, is no longer required. But there's always new challenges. I think of librarians as kind of we help information to be frictionless. So where there's a bottleneck, we'll help. It used to be that searching for information was a bottleneck, and our skills help people to find the information they wanted. Now that's almost been removed as a bottleneck. Everyone can search very easily. And new bottlenecks are around how we publish information, and there's a lot of complexity in some of the aspects of that open access. And so we're moving into that area. I think research data is probably another bottleneck which we can help with.
Mm-hmm. So I will then actually jump into this topic and come back to some of the other more general questions later. So that is one of the reasons I actually approached you, because of my interest in open access science, and what are the impediments to having that. And basically, maybe let's outline the problem, and then we can go into the nitty-gritty details of what's maybe a possible solution.
Okay, so I actually did a talk on open science recently, so I'm going to recycle some of that. So I had a slide titled "Transforming Research." So going back to the 1990s, as we talked about the internet coming along, and it began to transform scientific research, making communication and data exchange and publishing, or changing all of those areas. And the Human Genome Project was an early example of what could happen when you combine scientific data, informatics, and the internet. And those things coming together massively accelerated molecular biology research, so that one of our researchers in Mill Hill, so if someone in California published a new gene sequence and the function of that gene, the the very same day our researcher in Mill Hill could download that sequence, could work with that and apply that to their own research. So that instant availability of information globally transformed how biology worked. In another area, physics, physicists were used to sending around paper preprints of their work. Physicists tended to work in very large research groups, and they were used to sending around copies of their papers ahead of being published, so before they'd even been through peer review. And physicists were also early adopters of IT and the internet, and so that it came to the point where they had their new paper available on their computer. They print it out and then send it to their colleagues, and then they thought, hold on, we can just email it, and even better, we could just stick it on a web server somewhere and anybody can access it. And so what's called the archive, ARXIV, the Physics Archive, was born. That's a huge website where all high energy physicists and gradually more and more areas of physics posted their latest research papers ahead of getting into the journals. And these were called preprints. And again, that massively accelerated how physics research worked. Other subjects didn't adopt that immediately, but preprints have now spread to all areas of research. So we came to understand that that sharing is good for science. The internet made very fast sharing of information very easy, and the one big research funder in the States, the National Institutes for Health, they say that sharing of data maximizes the availability of data for other researchers and leads to better use of data and transparency of scientific data, which helps to ensure public trust and accountability. So we've seen technology and research funders and publishers all have a part to play, but also research culture. Different, I said that biology and physics adopted different ways of sharing information at different times. So different research cultures will have different approaches to what and when they're prepared to share. So I'm lucky, just working in a biomedical library, institute library. I only really have to deal with biologists and some medicine. I feel sorry for my colleagues in multi-faculty universities when they've got such a wide range of disciplines and approaches to data sharing and open access. One of the issues is that sharing, it does take a little bit of time. So in order to share something, you have to make sure that it's ready to be shared, and you have to post it and do various things. So it sort of seems to a busy researcher with lots and lots of other calls on their time and demands on doing things in a particular way, like legislative or other requirements. Open access and data sharing can seem like just another chore that they're being told they have to spend time on. So this is where libraries and other agencies in the organization our role is to try to make it as easy as possible. That's what we always try to do. We're aware that openness can seem like just the straw that broke the camel's back, something more that researcher has to do. So we try to take as much burden off researchers as possible. Moving on to open access. So that's the idea that your research paper, when it's fully published and peer reviewed, should be made open for everybody to use. Currently, our funders have policies that require all researchers to make their research papers open in some way. Now we depend to some extent. We can't do this independently. The papers are published in scientific journals, and the publishers of those journals very often they make a lot of money out of publishing research and then selling the journals onto the readership. So there's huge amounts of money in publishing, and some researchers, well, nearly all researchers, I should say, feel that scientific publishing is a bit of a rip-off. The scientist writes the paper, other scientists will peer review the paper, and the journal, the publisher obviously does a lot of valuable work as well, but they then sell the access back to the scientist. So it seems that we're putting a lot, the academic community puts a lot of input into journals, but also has to spend a huge amount of money on scientific journals. And so that the feeling that this isn't really working well for academia and the research community has led to more and more emphasis on open access. But we're in a bit of a battle with publishers sometimes. Some publishers make it very easy. Other publishers seem to keep putting blocks in the way, or they require more money to be paid to them to make material open access. So we're still having to do a lot of work to make papers open for everybody to read and to reuse. I should say it's not just about open to read, but also to reuse. One of the things we learned from the Human Genome Project was having all of these gene sequences available and protein sequences and all of the other biological data available openly for anyone to download. It was possible then to manipulate those to say to get assemble a number of different gene sequences and create new knowledge by combining those and using tools to work with them. And so one of the drivers for open access is actually to enable modern technologies, so text and data mining tools to work with the scientific literature. We can do that with scientific data, but not with the literature unless it's
open access.
It's open with a license to reuse. I'm skimming over the details here, but
I mean, there I would like to just quickly stop you and ask you a question.
Sure.
So basically, I think the public is maybe not aware that we are funded by public money, and that this money is then used to pay a privately funded company that then they have to again pay in order to be able to access the science that they have already paid. So what I'm curious about, that we both maybe might agree or not, but there is a support that the journals are offering scientists, but I think it really is sometimes more of an impediment when we talk about all these things, because we do prepare the paper, we even do the digital editing, we do the creative part, and then, as you said, we can't access our own papers. So I'm wondering, you said that there are many barriers which are created by the publishers, and I'm wondering, what are those, and what makes it so difficult to have the two-channel communication where we actually can work together rather than kind of having a clash?
The fundamental thing is the profit motive, sometimes being too high up the list of priorities. One of the early open access advocates, Stephen Harnad, he was a Canadian psychologist, but he worked in the UK for a long time. And he wrote millions of words about open access in the early 90s. I've read a small fraction of them. But he described research literature as the giveaway literature. he said academics want people to read their work. They don't write research papers to make money, but to share knowledge. So that's quite different from traditional book publishing, where an author writes a novel and they want to sell copies of that. They want to get royalties. They want to earn money from their writing. But academics, their business is generating knowledge and sharing knowledge. And they're paid from the, as you said, from the public purse or other funders to do that. They're not looking to earn money from their research papers. They want people to read it. Now, publishers, they add value by arranging peer review to arrange for other academics to go through and double check that they think the research is credible. Although that's another long conversation about the value of peer review. And publishers also have editorial staff, and some of them they do a lot of copy editing and formatting, and they produce lovely images as well. So, but it varies between publishers. So publishers have do add value, but what happened was, publishing used to be mostly from learned societies, so something like the Society of Microbiology in the UK, or the American Association of Immunologists have been in the business of publishing journals for a long time, so that they published research for the benefit of their communities, and they charged modest amounts for the journals. And there were commercial publishers. That in the 1970s, Robert Maxwell, who some of your listeners may remember, he famously fell off his yacht in 1991, I think it was, and drowned. He was a big media magnate. He owned a number of newspapers, but he also had a big publishing empire. And in the 70s, he'd seen that scientific publishing was a way to make easy money. He set up lots of new journals. He had very low quality standards, but he made huge amounts of money from scientific publishing, and that really was I think one of the start of the downfall of, if we can put it that way, of scientific publishing. The road into where profit became more and more important, and now we have 4 or 5 major scientific publishing houses making 30 to 40% profit on turnover, and between them, they control 50 or 60% of all scientific publishing. We still have learned society publishers, and many of those are putting out very, very well thought of journals at a much lower cost than the big commercial houses. So I'm afraid it's that profit motive and the needs of shareholders coming ahead of the needs of academia.
And there is one thing here I also want to ask, which is my impression from the other side, is how that impacts the science itself and how it changes the incentives. And so changes the incentive was almost like the big journals being in search for flashy titles, which do not often actually come as true. And so therefore, I'm wondering, what do you think is a way of the scientists getting back the power into their own hands, and kind of finding a way to work around this in a way?
This is a massive question. People sometimes think, that the problems of science publishing, it's all the fault of librarians, because we're paying all this money to the publishers. We support the publishers by subscribing, but of course it's the researchers who choose to publish their work in some of these very expensive journals. Perhaps we should just say a little bit about the concept of the highly selective journal.
Yes, please do.
That there's a trio of journals: Cell, Nature, and Science, or CNS in biological sciences, and those three are seen as the kind of the top level of journal. They are all highly selective. So Nature rejects about 95% of manuscripts submitted to it, and I think Science the same. I'm not sure about Cell. So they're not just aiming to publish any good science. They're aiming to create an issue which has got really fascinating, high impact, and dare one say trendy research papers. So they have professional editors. They have academic peer reviewers, but the editor of the journals, they are full-time working on editing the journal. So the professional editors will receive a manuscript, and they'll read it and may discuss it with colleagues, but they can reject the manuscript without sending it out to peer reviewers. So if they decide that, someone I know who's a Nature editor, he said the question he asked himself is, after he's read this paper, how has the world changed? Has the world changed through the new knowledge in that paper? And if the world hasn't changed, he rejects it. So they have a very high standard on the impact that paper makes. And it can be that if you're in an area of science which isn't so exciting, may not get headlines in the newspaper, I think the people working in biological systematics, I can't remember the name of the discipline, but working with new species, categorizing new species, they find it very difficult to publish in the higher impact journals. So there are disciplines, and I think infectious disease people, maybe this has changed now with COVID, but infectious disease people tended to find it hard to get into the highest impact journals. So there are areas of science which you just don't find in those what they call glamour mags. I like that term. I said there's three of them, but actually each of those three, they've kind of got a little empire of slightly lower level journals, but still with the same business model of professional editors and looking for high impact research. So now the incentive to publish in these journals, it's because they have high readership. So your work could be read by large numbers of people, but also there is a perception that if you published in one of these high level journals or highly selective journals, that your research is a cut above the average. Now, this is an interesting question: is to what extent does, by being published in a high reputation journal, does that reputation reflect onto your paper? How does that get translated onto your paper? How does your paper assume the characteristics of that journal? Some people feel that that papers published in those highly selective journals shouldn't be regarded any more highly than papers published in other journals. But the fact is that if you're given a list of papers to review, if you're trying to evaluate a research scientist and you see a list of their papers, 20 papers, you can read through all 20 papers and form your view. But more likely than not, you're going to have a look at the journals where they published and form a view based on how many highly selective journals they've published in. There is a strong move against this that started, I can't remember, 10 years ago. The San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, or DORA, D-O-R-A, they said that research assessment should not be based on the brand or the journal where the research is published, but on the quality of the research itself. And more funders and organizations have signed up to DORA, but in practice, it comes down to the researchers who are making these assessments. All of the the research funders, they don't decide themselves. They invite active research staff to help them to make decisions about when they're assessing other researchers for funding purposes. So the power is all in the hands of the researchers, but they don't feel like it is. We like to blame publishers or funders for not doing the right thing, but at the end of the day, it's the researchers themselves who have the power to make changes. But I think one other aspect we haven't really touched on is that research is a global enterprise. So, for researchers in the CRIC, their closest competitors may be in Australia, Japan, Germany, and California. So it's they're working to beat their competitors to interesting discoveries, and they will be reading research results from all over the world in the same way that research in those countries will be reading quick researchers' results. So it's a massive global enterprise, and it's moving on all the time, papers coming in and getting published all the time. So trying to make a big change in research culture to say, after this day, we're going to change it and do it this way, it's just really impossible. Maybe we need a massive team of change managers to figure out how we can make these changes, but it's very hard to turn this ship around to a more equitable way of publishing.
And there I also had one more question, which is for me always very interesting when people allow themselves to say, oh, I'm going to look at this paper and think whether it's changing the world. And I'm always thinking that Nature Science, they're published, I think, every 2 weeks or something like this.
Every week, yeah.
Or every week, yeah. And then I'm thinking, and they probably have like 10, 20 papers or research articles that are published. And I'm thinking, is it possible that actually 20 research articles in 2 weeks are all changing the world? And then every 2 weeks there's another 20 that they're changing the world. And also it's just kind of what happens to me when I think about these things is just this idea that science work as a one moment in time enterprise, that suddenly now we have changed the world and we kind of disregard all the past small steps we have made to actually come to this one big life-changing event. So I'm just wondering, how can we at least work on that part of the culture when we are talking about science as small incremental improvements that eventually will lead to something that might change the world, but it's not, it's just like a kind of a precipitation of many small events. And I feel like that we forget how science work often when we make statements like that.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting comment. Through having been a bit more exposed to science history and reading a little bit about of what science historians write, and there's a discipline called STS, or Science and Technology Studies, which encompasses history of science, philosophy of science, and all sorts of other things. And they're looking at about really studying how science works. Scientists tend to be, you're in the thick of it, you're doing the science, and it's sometimes hard to look, to stand outside and see how does science work. So STS is an interesting discipline of non-scientists studying how science works. And historians are very critical of what they call a Whiggish view of history. I don't know if you come across that term.
No.
It was new to me. And that's the idea that, and it's sort of encouraged by the culture of awards and prizes, but the idea that a figure, normally a white male figure, takes all the credit for a particular advance, whereas in fact, as you say, there's I think Newton said, if he's seen further, it's because he stood on the shoulders of giants.
Yes.
That any breakthrough is a result of a whole series of smaller breakthroughs leading up to that. Obviously, that there are people with additional insight, a cut above everyone else, who sees things that other people haven't seen with the same evidence in front of them. But the idea that there are sudden breakthroughs achieved by individuals is an incorrect view of science. That is, and today ever more so, that when we see research papers with tens or hundreds of papers, we know that team science is a very big thing. The Human Genome Project was thousands of biologists contributed to that, not all of whom got very much recognition, but team science really makes that idea of a single individual achieving something risible. So I think maybe we need to learn a little bit from historians, from the humanities, to understand better about how science works. But scientists don't always welcome observations from outside of science. Bruno Latour, the French sociologist, famously published his book Lab Life many years ago, decades ago, and that had a huge backlash, I think, from scientists.
Yeah, I can imagine. But I mean, for me, as again being trained in a school where actually we have been kind of studying the philosophy of science, also being a scientist, it has always been very beneficial. I think you had in your small booklet, there was the structure of scientific revolutions, I think it's and I think these are, for me, and actually there was a really wonderful essay which I now completely forgot the author, but also an essay about the downsides of science and the scientific method and what we don't see, and I will put it in the show notes actually. And so I do agree, and I feel like what we are lacking in the moment is having this in development of scientists. So having more discussions about, well, how do we do science, and what are the biases, not only the unconscious bias about being a female, male, or anything, or queer, but for example the unconscious bias of actually what is my unconscious bias as a scientist, and what do I assume as a scientist which I completely am unaware of. So I'm wondering what you have seen being involved in science but kind of sitting slightly on the edge, that is something that we as scientists maybe are not aware of.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can think of anything there. I'm probably not close enough to the science to have any meaningful insights there. Yeah, that's a tough one.
So maybe what I can also relate to, because we were just talking about the Whiggish history, and one of the questions I also ask is, what is success? Because this kind of relates to the whole story of how we praise and prize people. And so what do you think would then be a scientific success, and how could we also look at scientific success not only through a lens of a Nobel Prize or something like that?
Yeah, this is also challenging. The people who make the decisions about what is success are the people who have achieved success themselves under the existing system. So trying to get that change is very hard. And for a long time, there's been a push from research funders for researchers to undertake public engagement work to spread public knowledge of science and to talk with the lay people about their scientific research and take on board views from lay people. So funders say you should do this, but when they're evaluating researchers with a view to giving them additional funding, I'm fairly sure that a big program of public engagement work won't sway the decision unless there's also a very strong publication record. So I think you can be a fabulous public engagement and person, but if you're not publishing very strongly as well, you won't get further research funding. So there's a lot of lip service paid to things like EDI work and work, mentoring work and bringing on new science leaders through training PhD students and postdocs. But I just don't see that's going to change. That we're not going to reward people unless they've also got fantastic research record. I'm a bit skeptical about that.
But maybe it's not even about rewarding. Maybe it's just about appreciating.
Yeah, recognizing that there's, in terms of open access, again, you don't get any prizes for open access, making all of your work open and sharing your data openly. But there are schemes to have little badges, so that because sharing data and publishing open access, it's all in the digital space, so there's data about it, and that can be aggregated and turned into some new product. So there is the idea of putting open badges on, attaching open badges to, say, to somebody's ORCID profile. So that idea of recognizing achievements through non-research achievements through badges, digital badges, is perhaps another way. But whether that's enough, I don't know.
And how about affecting the culture, or at least having something that will hopefully over a long period of time, still somehow bring about these discussions and therefore affect maybe the culture in also PIs, or even among ourselves, as among peers, being okay with, well, let's have an appreciation of the effort that every one of us is doing into making science more open.
Yeah, I think the CRIC has its own internal awards scheme, and they have a number of different categories. They have a category for most impressive research, but they also have categories for the person or the team who's been most helpful to advancing research. And so this year the cleaning team, I think, won that award. So that sort of initiative, creating awards for different categories of input to research. I know Ottoline Leiser, who's the head of UKRI, she did a very interesting talk last year where she highlighted all the different roles, including librarians and archivists, but research administrators, all sorts of different roles that go into creating great research. So she's very keen to reward or to recognize all the different contributions to science, and something like the technician commitment. I know that, again, the CRIC is signed up to recognizing the role not just of the research leaders, but all people doing all of the the practical work in the laboratory that contributes. They don't get the glory, but there's an increasing recognition that they are, without them, the research wouldn't happen. So we have to make sure that we recognize them too, and give them rewards too. So I remember slightly different tack, but maybe kind of national and international awards should have more categories. I think the Royal Society, they have an award for public engagement as well. I know somebody, actually a fellow librarian, ex-biologist who got that award last year or the year before. So I guess we maybe we need to get the Nobel Committee to institute some, I'm not going to say lower level, but to recognize the different dimensions of scientific achievement and input. The Lasker Prize, which is another very prestigious prize, I remember, I think that went one year to Bruce Alberts, who was a molecular biologist, and in 1983 he published the book Molecular Biology of the Cell, which was one of the seminal, everybody had that book. So his prize, it wasn't just for that book, but I'm sure that the importance of that book in biology made him a candidate for that prize, along with his research, because it had a massive impact across the world on spreading a knowledge about this new tool of molecular biology.
And so I would just briefly come back to the open science and the power being in the hands of researchers, and wondering how do you think that we can reclaim that power, and what kind of conversations need to be held in order for us to be more aware that we are actually the ones who are making those decisions to publish and where to publish, and we are the ones who are making those decisions to peer review for free or to do many things for free, and how can we actually exercise our power without being, and this is something that I always have in mind, without actually being ostracized from the community and still having access to sharing and being taken seriously for the expertise we have.
Yeah. So I'll start out by saying, as a librarian, I'm always very tentative about giving advice to researchers on what they should do. That it's not my life my career that's going to be affected. So I sort of generally draw back from that. However, it's I'm interested. You use the word community. That I think changes will probably happen in smaller communities, not across science as a whole or biology as a whole, but smaller communities. So, for instance, Tim Gowers, the Cambridge mathematician, he effected change by I can't remember that, but there was a mathematical journal. I can't remember whether he started a new journal or he took a journal to open access that was previously a commercial journal. But so he was very influential. He's written, again, a lot of very influential pieces about open access in mathematics. And 10 years ago, he kind of spearheaded a massive anti-commercial publisher backlash. But so in mathematics, in his field, he's affected change by making that journal open access. There was, in linguistics, there was a famous case where a journal of the commercial publisher, the whole editorial board resigned from the journal, and they set up a new journal with a different name, but exactly the same subject area, a new open access journal. So that sort of limited thing within a field, if people agree to take action, they can do it. So seeing more journals flip, and I think it's interesting. We haven't really talked about Plan S and the changes recently in open access rules from the funders, but there've been a lot of changes in the last 18 months, and I think this is going to lead to more journals from commercial publishers flipping to open access models. And I think when we've got a certain level of open access journals, say if 25% of or the big publishers' journals flip to open access, that'll be a lot more open access, and it may be that editorial boards will be more feel safer to do something similar, something radical like all resigning en masse and starting a new open access journal, or insisting to the publisher that they want this journal to become open access. So I think we may see more radical action from editorial boards and editors, but it's probably going to be within small areas rather than system-wide. We're seeing also another big thing I think researchers can do is to post preprints. I mentioned the physicist back in 30 years ago showing us the way. Well, it was only 10 years ago that biologists really started posting preprints on a new server called bioRxiv, and we have medRxiv and chemRxiv now. So in our space, there's a number of great preprint servers where you can post your work as soon as you finish the paper and submitted it to the journal, post it as a preprint so everybody can read the unreviewed research. So I think that's something in the power of researchers. More and more researchers are doing it, but still only sort of 8 to 10% of all biomedical research is posted as a preprint. So we've got a long way to go. But I think that creates a bit of grit in the oyster, a bit of so an accelerant to change, so that if you can't get access to the peer-reviewed final version of the paper, you can still access the preprint, and that may motivate publishers to accept that they have to make some changes in their models.
So I'm also curious. You mentioned, did you say Plan S? Because it's something I haven't heard of, so I'm curious.
Okay, well, in 2016, the European Union, I think it was, yes, the European Union signaled its intent to move more strongly to open access. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to bore you with some details about what open access is, but
yes,
I talked earlier about open access. It means free to read and free to reuse. And the original definition in Budapest in 2001, there was a meeting of people that decided on some definitions for open access. So it's free to read, free to reuse, and immediately open access. Open access up until now, in practice, there are papers that are immediately free to read and to reuse, but there's also a lot of papers that are maybe free to read, but only after 6 months, or free to read, but not to reuse. So we've had a lot of kind of not 100% open access. It fulfills some of the criteria, but not all of them. So in 2016, the EU signaled that it wanted to move more strongly to full open access. And in September 2018, a list of European research funders, including the Wellcome Trust that fund the CRIC and UKRI that also funds the CRIC, they came together as something called Coalition S, and they published Plan S, which was setting out, really going back to the 2001 declaration from Budapest, saying any research that we fund, it must be immediate, it must be open for reuse as well as free to read. And from January last year, some funders put this into place. From April this year, other funders have adopted similar rules. And so this is really ramped up the requirements, whereas previously, up until the end of 2020, CRIC published about 95% of its research papers in compliance with our funders' open access policies. Now we're seeing that slipping. I think last year it was about 90%, but the policies sort of starting to bite more now. So we're having to work a lot harder to comply with these policies, and in some cases, the publishers have not adjusted. It takes time for all the publishers to adjust their policies so that we can publish with them. And because most of the funders in Coalition S supporting Plan S are from UK and Europe, there's a couple of US funders too, but the biggest US funders are not part of this. And so some of the American publishers, particularly American Learned Society journals, we're struggling to achieve compliance with papers in those journals. So Plan S, a lot of people hate it. It's a job creation scheme for librarians because it's massively making life more complicated. So we have to work a lot harder. So we're putting a lot more into open access work at the moment. I think given another couple of years, things will have settled down and we'll be working better with it. But some of the changes are more challenging for publishers, and it's not quite clear. So there is a bit of a battle between the funders and the publishers, and the researchers are caught in the middle of that at the moment. So I'm not quite clear where that's going. It's not going to be sorted out in the immediate future. But part of the Plan S scheme is, in effect, to push more journals to flip to open access. So when I talked about, by the end of 2024, I'm expecting there will be a lot more open access journals around. That's because of the impetus from Plan S.
And so also one thing I would like maybe to make people aware is what are the expenses of having open access, and how actually does that affect equitability of research? Right. Because obviously CRIC can pay for those differences, but can every institution pay? And what does that mean for having equitable science?
Yeah, even CRIC, some of the open access charges for the most selective journals are really very high. So I think if you looking at the charges that we pay to publish an article immediately open access, where there's a paid open access option, $1,000 would be a relatively cheap one. $3,000 is quite commonplace. Some up to $5,000 in the higher prestige journals. The highest prestige journals now we're paying something like I think 9,000 or 10,000 euros. So if you publish a few papers in some of those high-end journals, you can buy a few cars or a small house for that.
Yeah.
And I am going to report to our senior management in the next month, because I think that increased spending they will want to know about. But as you said, where the CRIC has got a reasonable level of research funding, universities, some of those will struggle more. There are ways to publish that don't open access that don't entail paying extra money to the publisher, but many publishers have set their face against those free ways to publish. Now, looking more globally, outside of the wealthier research countries, publishers got together some years ago to make access to the literature free, so reading access free for people in countries with the lowest GDP. So they look at the World Bank list of countries with GDPs below a particular value, and access is free for countries on that list. Now, that inevitably creates a list of countries that are still relatively poor, but slightly above that level, who don't have access, free access. So that there's still problems there. And that same list is used by many publishers to offer free open access publishing. So they have what they call a waiver, and they will waive the open access charge for researches in those countries. Many researchers feel that it's somehow demeaning to be offered charity to publish your work. So and it's not always clear when the waiver is available. Some publishers make it clear, some don't really make it clear, so you have to request it. So there's lots of worries about that. Interestingly, paying to publish open access is something which is commonplace in Europe and North America, but in some territories in South America, they have a lot of open access journals which are so-called diamond open access journals, where they're free to read and they're free to publish. So they're supported either through universities or other agencies. So there's a much bigger, a much larger number of people can publish freely in those open access journals than can pay to publish in the global north, expensive to publish journals. I think China too has a very extensive list of national journals which are free to publish in. So this is a knotty problem. Every year there's something called Open Access Week, where to promote and celebrate open access, and they choose a theme each year. And the last 3 years, the theme has been on all around this issue of equity and inclusiveness. And we don't really have a good solution to that. Some of the some publishers are so there's an open access publisher called PLOS, Public Library of Science. They publish mostly in biology, but they pioneered. So up until recently, every paper we have published there, we paid a fee for, but they pioneered some new models whereby we subscribe on an annual basis and then can publish unlimited. And they've done a lot of modeling work, and so different institutions will pay different amounts depending on the their historic publishing patterns, and they're looking to encourage ways for people outside of the global north to publish freely in their journals. And they've launched some new journals, including some on climate and global public health, which are explicitly targeting countries outside of the global north, where the ability to pay to publish is less. So that they're kind of looking past where we are now, looking into the future, thinking we don't want to keep doing things the same way we have been doing. So they're coming up with new schemes. I don't know whether they'll be successful long term, but I think it's important that we have people thinking of new ways of funding publishing, and so the CRIC is supporting that, and a lot of the UK universities, I think, are supporting that. There's another thing I wanted to say in terms of innovative publishing initiatives and challenging the status quo. We have seen a lot of new sorts of journals coming along. F1000 Research started up, and they've been copied, or they've kind of extended their way of publishing by launching other journals for sponsored by some funders. So the model of F1000 Research is you submit your paper, it's posted as a preprint, so ahead of peer review, it's posted on their website as a preprint, and the journal then invites peer reviewers to openly peer review that paper, so that their name and their comments are published openly on the website. And as soon as it gets 2 positive peer reviews, then that's regarded as published, and it gets indexed in the regular databases. And that, so the Wellcome Trust liked that pattern, and they've established something called Wellcome Open Research, which uses that very model and that same platform. And any Wellcome Trust-funded researcher can publish in Wellcome Open Research without any charge. And a few other funders so the European Union and some other medical charities and the African Academy of Sciences have established copycats of this model. So that's an interesting way that if a funder funds the platform for the publishing of research that they've funded, then the research institution doesn't have to pay anything additional. So that's an interesting model, I think. And another more radical model which is launching at the end of this month, something called Octopus Publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is looking at all of the journals that we've talked about so far are publishing typical articles with an introduction, literature review, a methods section, a results section, a discussion section. So Octopus, they've identified 8 different sorts of research output. So you might have a theory or theoretical approach. You might have some data that you've generated. You'll have some protocols that you've devised, and you may have analyses and then discussion. So they're encouraging researchers to publish those, to submit those different sorts of research outputs as separate items.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea there is that perhaps there's a theory, some theoretical basis published. 5 different research groups might think, oh, that's interesting, and develop some protocols, and then another 10 different research groups may use those protocols to generate data, which all get published, and then the analysis or the interpretation may be done by somebody different again. So I don't know whether it's going to work. I think theoretically, it's a very interesting approach, and it's got a. It may be that by offering the possibility of amalgamating different research groups' data before coming up with an interpretation, that may give rise to stronger science and conclusions. But again, as I was saying, making such a radical change in the real world is quite an undertaking. So it may be, we've taken 10 years in biology for preprints to get to about 10% of the total. So I can see it's going to take a very long time for this sort of model to take hold. Michael Nielsen, who's commented on Science and Publishing extensively, he gave a talk and he said it took 100 years for the idea of the scientific paper to become firmly established. So we've been working with preprints and open access just for 20 or 30 years. So, and we shouldn't be too disappointed that things haven't changed overnight.
Yeah, well, I guess this kind of conversations are just something to be had over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So what I would like to do now is just to come back to a little bit of the more personal questions. So one of the questions we discussed is when do you think, we talked about success, and so what do you think has been your personal success, and when do you think you have actually won over yourself, where the feeling of success was kind of internal rather than having someone to tell you that something good has happened?
Yeah, I think so I'll answer those back to front. So I think in my first library job at the pharmaceutical company, after being there 4 or 5 years, and I started attending external events with other librarians and conferences and that sort of thing, and talking to people, and I came to realize that I was actually pretty well informed about current trends in libraries and publishing and new developments in the field. So I suddenly realized, actually, I know what I'm talking about. I know more than some of these other people. I've pushed myself out from my immediate field of view to learn about other things, and to take note of developments in adjacent fields. So that I think that's when I first started to think, yeah, I can be a little bit proud of what I know. I'm a and I think that's probably when I started applying for other jobs as well, feeling confident to do that. In terms of particular success, well, I guess I felt successful, in getting place at university that I wanted. So that was a small success earlier. But in terms of work, I think in 1995, I applied for funding for a project. So I did the project proposal and assembled a team of people in some other institutions. And this was to develop an internet subject gateway. It seems very old-fashioned these days, but back then in the 90s, finding information on the internet, this was pre-Google, and finding good quality information on academic subjects, it was a lot harder. And so we were funded to create, in effect, a library catalog for useful websites on the internet for biology and medicine. And this was another example. There was an existing project in social sciences that somebody had established, and so I talked with them a lot, and we copied their model, but putting in some of the expertise that I'd gained by playing around with the internet for biology. So getting that funding awarded, that was particularly, I think that was the first time I thought, yeah, we've got the money, we're going to do this great project. And that lasted for getting on for 10 years, which was surprising to me. But
I'm curious, you have a career of about 40 years, I think you said, and which is kind of coming to an end. How do you feel about the career choices you have made, and how do you feel about your journey now that you can look back, and what do you feel like you can give as an advice to any young person that just doesn't know how to discover themselves?
I think, well, as I said earlier, I've not really done any planning in my career. I've just kind of moved on from one thing to another, and the last 30 years I've been very, very lazy. I stayed at, well, I was at Mill Hill for 10 years as deputy, then became the head, which was quite a different job, but in the same environment. And then I just transitioned into the Crick when the Crick was created out of the legacy institutes. So I've sort of just stuck with things and taken the opportunities that presented themselves. In terms of, I'm going back to success and achievements and rewards. With a chemistry degree, potentially I could have gone into a much more lucrative line of business. Some of the other people working at the pharmaceutical company where I worked, I shared a house with, and they were in the chemical production side, so they had chemistry degrees just like me, but they were earning, they went on to earn a lot more than I did. But I think I've been content with what I'm doing. I've enjoyed it. I'm not sure that I would have been cut out for, certainly didn't feel cut out for work in a lab, and probably not in the chemical production either. There was a point in the 90s when I thought maybe I should move away from Mill Hill, from NIMR, and look at other jobs. And I did have a look at some other jobs, and I sort of thought, how can I write a successful, persuasive job application for this? A higher level job, much more management responsibility. And I thought, well, okay, assuming that I did get called for interview, then I've got to go for an interview and persuade them in person that I can do all of these things. And looking ahead further, I thought, well, if I did get the job, then I've actually got to do all of those things, and I'm not sure I really want to do that. So that thought experiment, I didn't apply for that job, and I just felt, actually, I'm comfortable where I am. I enjoy what I'm doing. I've got the level of stress that I can manage. So I'm just going to stay where I am. Unfortunately, I did get a lot more stress because of the transition from NIMR to the CRIC that happened. But I've had a lot of different experiences, and I found it's a fascinating journey. But working with the biologists at the forefront of their fields has been a privilege too. In terms of advice to younger people starting out, again, I think that's very tough because the world is so different. Even in the idea that someone might have 20 years in the same job in the same employer seems slightly incredible now. Even in the library world, we've seen a lot more short-term contracts, people employed for a project for a year or 2 years, people or even being able to train. I had a grant to go to university and then another grant to do my library diploma. I don't think that funding for those is anything like as easy now. So the whole world is a lot more challenging. So I'm not sure what I can say. I guess good luck is the thing. I can say, you're working in a small. So I've always worked in small libraries, and I've enjoyed that because you do see a wide range of things, and you're more connected to the organization perhaps than you might be in a larger library setup. So I've valued that, but it does mean I've always pushed out to colleagues in other places, so networking, attending events, and in the last 10 to 15 years, all of the social media stuff, engaging on Twitter and through blogs. So you need to reach out to colleagues in other places. So that's always important, to develop your network of colleagues to support you. And yeah, the other thing I guess I'd say that has been one of my strong points is to get out of my box. So I'm a librarian. I could just stay in my library box and just do things, but I've always I took the chance to explore the internet a bit more and set up the institute website way back, and to do work with producing the institute's annual report. I devised and managed the production of a book on the history of NIMR. So I've looked a little bit into biological sequences and tried to dabble in the research data, but I kind of pulled back from that because the complexity is so much. But so I think identifying new opportunities that you can contribute to, or just if you're lucky like I was, and you've got the scope within the job to do some interesting things, do a little bit of exploration outside of your immediate field, then do that, and very often it will pay dividends.
Yeah. And so on a more personal note, what do you think has been a challenge that was the most difficult for you to overcome?
I'm trying to think, which one is this? Is this the question about the change?
Yes. So
yes.
What kind of change was most difficult for you to make?
Yeah. So in terms of work, I think moving from NIMR to the CRIC was very challenging. I sort of hinted earlier that librarians don't always have high strategic importance to an organization, and so sorting out library arrangements at the CRIC wasn't the first thing that was dwelt on. So we had to wait quite a while before plans were made for that. But also at Mill Hill, we had a massive historical collection. We'd been there, or the library had existed since 1920 and had kept vast amounts of material. So I had to dispose of almost everything in the physical library. The archives, we were able to find a home for most of that. A few books and journals went to other libraries, and we did transfer a small amount, which has formed the basis of our historical collection at the Crick. But we had about 3 kilometers of shelving, and nearly all of that had to be disposed of. So that was that felt very difficult, painful. Yes, I got over it, but it seemed like a lost opportunity. But the thing is, we had lots of old material, but it's not what historians or special collections librarians call old. It wasn't, it's 19th century at the oldest. It wasn't 16th century incunabula or rare books where there's only 3 copies in the world. There were plenty of copies of these things around, but it was the value of it was the collection, all of the disparate things together. But that wasn't sufficient value for it to, say the Wellcome collection would have been the obvious place to put it, but they will have had most of what we had there. So they did take quite a bit of stuff, but much of it just that they didn't need it.
And so along the painful part, what do you think is a pain that you are willing to share that you think has shaped you the most?
Well, I'd say the death of my mother. Ironically, this came just a few months after we got the funding for that project that I mentioned. So it was a bittersweet time. So she was 80. And at that time, I was a single man. I felt really alone. And that made me realize that I needed to sort myself out. And that was when I had support from work. There was a welfare officer, and she gave me a lot of support through that year or two. And then I started seeing a psychotherapist, and over a period of time helped me to understand my feelings, my emotions, and through all of those discussions, the therapist doesn't tell you what to think. You have to say it yourself. You have to realize it yourself and utter it. But he helped me to realize that I was a gay man, and that I could cope with being a gay man, and that transformed my life.
And can I ask, how old were you at that time, if I may?
Yeah. So I was 43 when I got to that point of realizing that that's what how I needed to live my life.
That is very brave to actually take up that challenge and actually look deep inside yourself. Or it was a necessity.
Well, I think both, and I guess it was brave. It was very hard, and to begin with, I couldn't see the way through. There wasn't, I couldn't have done it on my own. But it was a necessity. When my mother died, I realized I had to sort something out. I couldn't just. I'd sort of approached my non-existent love life in the same way as my career, of just kind of waiting for the next thing to happen. But that wasn't going to work now. I needed to do something more strongly to plan the rest of my emotional life.
And so, being a trainee psychotherapist, I am actually curious. How difficult was it for you to find a person to work with, and how difficult was it for you to actually even ask for help? Because that was quite some years ago, when therapy was not something that's very popular.
Well, so as I said, that the welfare officer at NIMR, so she was a trained therapist as well. So I had some talks with her, and she gave me the British Association of Psychotherapists had a handbook. I think it's online now, but she sent me some of the pages for the therapists in the North London, and I went through there looking at what they offered, and and chose a few, and the first one that I made contact with, we got on well. He was local, and that it just worked out. We had but it was so finding somebody. I was lucky, I guess, partly, but also having the tip off to go for a BAP member therapist rather than just choosing somebody out of the phone book. So I had that quality assurance that this was going to be a proper professional person. But then the whole process, it was all very new, and I think we had a lot of kind of jostling to begin with, and not quite understanding from my part how it would all work.
And so what do you think was the thing that kept you, that kept the belief that can actually be helpful, even though you might have not understood it in the beginning?
Well, I just think I needed, I didn't have any other ideas, I suppose. So I kept with it. Sometimes there was a week when we didn't really get anywhere, but every now and again there'd be some breakthrough. I would say something, and suddenly realize that I'd articulated some truth that I hadn't known before, and that would sort of I'd be like this. I'd suddenly feel emotional that, I'd said something that I didn't know was true. And so that those little advances helped to make me realize that this was doing something that I couldn't do by myself.
Wow. And I'm curious, because then one of the questions is, who are the people who impacted you and shaped the way you are today? So
well,
is the therapist one of them?
Yeah, the welfare officer and the therapist are two of them, but also my boss at NIMR from 1989 to 99 as Bob Moore. So he was the chief librarian, and so he appointed me. He gave me the job. He gave me the space to do interesting work and to pursue interesting avenues. So that he kept things going. I contributed. I had regular work to do, the things I had to get done, but there was always space to do interesting things and look at maybe new areas. And he also, at the opposite end of the scale from the internet and all the technical stuff, he gave me an understanding about the history of science, and the joy of historical archives and historical book collections. That so I became a broader librarian because of that, not just the technical side, but understanding historical materials too.
And I'm also curious about, so you said 43 and discovering that you were a gay man 20 years ago. And I recently read the book, The Velvet Rage. I don't know if you have heard of it.
I don't know it.
It's written by a psychotherapist, but who has specifically worked with homosexual populations, and specifically male. And so I really empathize with the amount of shame sometimes that comes with that realization. And also culturally, 20 years ago, I guess the UK was a very different place. So what do you think? How do you think that has changed now? And how do you think that the cultural moment in time has shaped the way you have been then?
Well, I'd say 40 years ago, culturally, it was very different. And it would have been a lot harder coming out as gay 40 years ago. 20 years ago, I think, we'd had a few years of the Labour government, and they'd started enacting more liberal legislation on homosexuality and age of consent and adoption and all the rest of it. So I'd say that I didn't really have any worries about it then. yeah, to begin with, the first time you tell somebody else, and the second time, and the 300th time, but I guess by the 300th time you tell somebody else, you've got enough positive experiences of coming out that nothing bad happens, that it does get easier. So I don't think it was a big problem with me 20 years ago. And in terms of shame, I think by that time I'd sort of I didn't have the shame. I had the huge regret that I'd kind of missed out on 20 years of life as an emotional person. So there was sort of a sense of grief for what might have been, but I got over that. The joy of being myself got me through all of that.
And do you feel like you're still facing challenges around that topic, or you feel like at this moment of time you can fully express who you are?
Well, living in London, North London, things are relatively straightforward, but there's always challenges. There are still people or particular communities where you're not quite sure what they'll say. I've been very lucky. I've not had negative experiences of that sort, or occasionally on a late night bus somebody would say something, but I guess you may see something on the news or hear about some edict from some religious organization which is upsetting, but not personally, not directly confronting me personally. So yeah, I'm very lucky where I live and the time in which I live.
And so I also want to come back to the choir and the singing, which I was very curious about, again, as someone who really loves singing. And so how did that come into your life? And yeah, how did all of that come to be? What does that do for you?
Well, it came about, I guess my parents loved music, and my brothers and sisters loved music, and so there was music always at home. We did some early years at school. My voice broke a bit early, and I stopped singing for a bit, and then I joined a local church choir. But really, I think it took off when I went to university in Bristol. I went along to the Catholic Cathedral, Clifton Cathedral, which is a beautiful modern building, and I was able to join their choir. So it's an adult choir, not a professional choir, but an adult volunteer choir. And I don't know that I really contributed very much in the first couple of years, but through that, we practiced twice a week. So there's new music for the service on Sunday every week. So you're forever being confronted with new music to learn. And somehow through that, I picked up the skill to sight read music, to sing at sight, and I acquired a knowledge of a great repertoire of church music. And that really was the foundation, and that's lasted me very well. So I went on to sing in other church choirs, and I sung in big choirs too. At the moment, I sing with a large choir in North London, which rehearses very close to me. And what he said also, what do I get out of it? Well, there is some pleasure just in hearing your own voice, and being part of I think particularly for a large choir, being part of a greater whole. You're together, a bit like we were talking with team science. We're achieving something together that we couldn't achieve individually, and performing with an orchestra is a magical experience. Just it's an overwhelming sound, and yeah, and certain pieces of music just have an overwhelming emotional impact as well. So all the years that I wasn't experiencing human love or any of that, because I was kind of isolated from people, my main output for all of that emotion, high emotion, was through music. So that I think that served me well.
And so what kind of music touches you the most? Or
well, sometimes it's the music and sometimes it's the memories that it evokes. So high romantic music, so like Mahler, Bruckner, but also the closing of the Agnus Dei in Bach's B minor Mass, I find very moving. And I think that's just through having heard or sung it at a particular time when I think that was after my father died. So that sort of created an association which still moves me. But yeah, all sorts of things. More. I'm obviously great beauty in the musical melody or in the harmony, and sometimes just really loud music. I love percussion, or the Royal Albert Hall organ when they just so huge volumes of noise can be very moving as well. That seems a very unsophisticated thing to say, but it's true.
So to wrap up, just the two last questions. What kind of compliments do you like to receive?
Yeah, I don't have any great insights here. I just think anything genuine. If the compliment is just somebody being nice or polite or coming up with a cliched compliment, it doesn't do anything. But if I feel that it's a real genuine compliment, then I'm pleased to receive it.
And what are some things that have become more, and some things that have become less important as you have gotten older?
More important, my pension. So this was critical in the move from the Medical Research Council Institute to the CRIC. So having 25 years of pension with the MRC, I was very concerned, and that was a very good pension scheme. I was very concerned that I'd be able to transfer that across, and that has been the case. So that was very important for me. Makes me seem a bit mercenary, but it's less important, I think, what people think of me. I'm not completely impervious to what people think of me, but it's nice that people think well of you or like you or whatever. But I like to think I'm less affected by that, and I'm prepared to say something which is perhaps unpopular or something that needs to be said. I don't worry. And in terms of being gay and mentioning that, I don't have concerns around that.
Well, with this, I would like to thank you for really taking your time, for your openness, for actually saying important things that maybe not many people are ready to say about scientific publishing, and just your genuine nature. So yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alex. It's been a great conversation.
You have just heard the story of Frank Norman, the head of library services at the Francis Crick Institute. Frank has over 35 years of experience in biomedical library and information work, including 25 years running the library and information services at NIMR Mill Hill. He has been an active member of the committees of the CHIL and Rescuing Library groups, and is now a member of the UKCG Education Subcommittee and the BioArchive Advisory Group. He takes a strong interest in open science and scholarly communication and the interplay with science communication and social media. If you want to connect to him, you can find him on Twitter @FrankNorman. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and if you like what you hear, please share and subscribe so that our stories can reach